automated identification of borrowings in multilingual word lists. Our institute has recently moved to Leipzig, so we are now called the Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, but the agenda has not changed. So we are still trying to improve, specifically my group is trying to improve the automated methods for computational historical linguistics. Now, as a short background, what I want to, this is actually, so this is not going to be a long talk because it's not going to be a smart new method that is very complicated. Few linguistic phenomena are as pervasive as language contact in linguistics. There has been some progress in computational approaches to historical language comparison, cognate detection, detection of sound correspondence patterns, and this was sometimes maybe also a little bit unexpected given the difficulty of the task, but there has not been any real progress regarding automated borrowing detection. But this is something that we might need because borrowings are what prevents us from doing good phylogenies, as we have also seen in some talks before. So in a review study from 2019, I discussed most available methods, and I just want to give a point to that. Sorry, I will just load the study. So it's here. It was appeared in this language and linguistic unfortunately, it is not open access because this always costs a lot, and I didn't want to spend this money on my project on that study. But I can also share it whenever you want. You just need to write me an email. So this is the study where I have discussed many different methods on borrowing detection that I see that are there so far, and we can break them down to phylogeny-based approaches. Then we have distance-based methods, phylogeny-related conflicts, and similar words across unrelated languages. And then we have the distribution-based approaches, which would actually look at certain distributional differences in Swadesh lists, for example. So getting back to the slides now. The phylogeny-based method, specifically this MLN method, I was responsible myself in extending it and applying it to linguistic data, are rather unreliable in my impression. They work on, so conflicts in phylogeny are not what helps us in order to identify borrowings. But what helps are sequence-based methods, because, but only for the case of detecting borrowings across language families. So, but the ones that have been proposed so far only work on language pairs. So scholars have just shown this as a proof of concept, that you can just have a list of, let's say, Turkish. Now, let's say use something where know the languages, then you use compare maybe a list in Chinese and then compare it against a list in Japanese, and you could look for recent borrowings there in the case, yeah, in certain aspects. So you might say that this method is rather boring, and rightfully so, because we are interested in the deeper relationship. But as long as we cannot find reliable ways to identify borrowings based on correspondence patterns and the like, it seems better to do what we can do, applying shallow borrowing detection methods to major contact areas to derive fresh statistics on borrowability, because this is something that we still lack, the complete statistics, because all we have for the moment is the World Atlas, World Loanword project, and they have only 40 languages included there. So I just expanded this method that is there to borrowing detection in multilingual word lists. This is a new method in this sense, because what we do is we select larger word lists from a language contact area, and then we use automatic cognate detection to identify language internal cognates. You could do all of that also manually. And then we compare identified cognate sets across language families to find xenologue clusters, that is etymologically related words which have experienced borrowing in their history. I call these xenologues because that is a term that is a counterpart to homologues, or something, a specific term in biology used for genes that have experienced a history of lateral transfer. And since we lack a term for that in linguistics, I thought it is useful to call them like that for the time being. The method cannot identify borrowing directions so far, but you know that identifying the direction of borrowings is anyway hard, so we don't need to size our challenges by now. We can think about it later. It identifies, however, clusters of borrowed words across different language families. And I want to illustrate now that it offers additional possibilities to analyze the data after xenologues have been identified. So I made a case study on Southeast Asian languages, and this is based on lexical data for various C languages that we converted to the CLDF formats. that we use in order to unify language data. And then the data aggregation can be done via the Concepticon, because we have different languages with different concepts, but we can unite them because we have them linked to our Concepticon project. So we know whether there's a common core in the concepts that are expressed by the different word lists. And then we can normalize the phonetic transcriptions via the cross-linguistic transcription systems, which is again a tool that we have been creating in order to be able to harmonize the alphabets with little efforts. This is the data selection. I can also try to show that a little bit bigger later on, but what you see is China, yeah, major, but mostly China, and you see that I have in blue the Chinese dialects here, and in red I have Hmong-Mien languages, and in yellow I have Tai-Kadai languages. These were the ones where I could find most data for, and data in the that would be covered in my word list. So we have Sino-Tibetan, we have Sinitic languages, 12, we have one Bai language, one Loloish language, we have Hmong-Mien, 4 Mienic languages, 19 Hmongic languages, and then we have Tai-Kadai, a couple of Sui languages, and a couple of Zhuang languages. In the case of the Zhuang languages, people are still not disputing whether they belong to Tai-Kadai or not, but I think they really belong to Tai-Kadai and not to Sino-Tibetan. And this is how it looks in the tool, in the editor, the annotation that I did, because I did first a manual search for the cognates in order to evaluate the methods afterwards. And what I can show you, the application is here. And if you go through the different concepts that you can see here on my website, will always save it when I work on this, but then you can see that I have 2 IDs here. So I don't have only the cognate set ID that is also always used in the Starling packages, but I have this borrow ID. U means user, that means myself, where I've indicated whether I think that the words are borrowed or not, also based on certain knowledge. But you can also see some certain potential annotation problems that are there. But in any case, I've tried to go through the data, and if you order by subgroup, you can then see, or by these borrow IDs, you can then see whether for a certain term we find clear or less clear borrowings among the languages. And at some points, I can even indicate the source of the borrowing. Let me see whether I have done this here consequently, because I've not always done it so far. That would be another pass. But in this case, on the Sinitic languages where you have this now and all these items for, so it would be for to bite, yeah, in these cases where you have all these roots. If you have a language like Yongnai, the Hmong-Mien languages, which has nga, then it's probably a clear borrowing from Chinese at some stage. And I can also indicate even the source in this case. So in this way, I have annotated the data manually so far, and this is still work in progress. So I can probably try to really enhance this more. And I can also, you can do all the things that we usually do with the editor tool. So I could now look at, here you have a nice borrowing that shows you some borrowings from Guang in Chinese into the Hmong-Mien languages to bright something bright, yeah. I can also align the words, etc. So I can do a lot of annotation tasks that may be interesting for later studies that I do not do now. Now, getting back to my slides, what we do as the analysis, we created a new package. The package was also used for other purposes, but it's called LingRex for linguistic reconstruction with LingPy. So it's something that is based on the LingPy package and extends it a little bit, not only automatic cognate detections, but also some new analysis. And we have worked on this very hard in version 1.10 now. We have made a new CLDF data set, and I will just open this in a new tab, and then I can show you in a minute, that offers the data in the CLDF formats and also runs the commands for the analysis. We have new plotting routines, and the editor data set with manual cognate and xenolog judgments is also online. You can also access it via a link. You can only not modify it. So I'm the only person who has the modification rights there on this data set so far. And here's the evaluation of the workflow. We use these F scores. You can just think in the terms of percentages. So if it gets like 88%, as you can see here, so 0.87, this is quite okay. So it's close to 90%. I'm happy about that result. And for the borrowing detection, I'm also happy about the result. And since we do not want to make a competition between the machine and humans and say the machine comes closer to human, I'm completely fine with that result, because what I will do is afterwards anyway refine what I've been doing. And it's also possible that my own judgments on the cognates and on the borrowings are still have to be improved in the future. Now, regarding the borrowability, I started to make some experiments that might be interesting, and specifically when we look at the statistics. So I have 250 concepts in my sample, yeah, 250 concepts, and it was about 100, or you see 78 items of those are in the Swadesh list from 1955, in the 100-word Swadesh list, and 61 are in the Leipzig-Jakarta list. I selected them, the concepts, because I had coverage from them, so I had data. So I did not do the opposite that I say, I have my concept list and want to fill it, yeah? So I was more like opportunistic in the sense, what I have, I take it, yeah? All items are 250 here, and you can see that the number of non-borrowed words, but this is really strict now. This means the words that are not related to any words that have a cognate history with other language from other language families in my sample. So these are cognates only and not also xenologues in a sense. And since a xenologue doesn't define the direction, they can be borrowed, or they can be borrowing sources or descendants of borrowing sources. So if I have 80%, and then don't take this literally as saying the language has borrowed more than 15% or something. No, that is not the case. It's the case that we have a lot of words that have a history of borrowing, but we do not know in which direction it went, yeah? But if you look at that, you can see a striking difference between Swadesh, 81%, and no Swadesh, 73%. This is something that you would consider as, well, striking, right? The same seems to apply to Leipzig-Jakarta, where you have 0.81% again and 74%. But then what is interesting for us is actually to investigate whether this is significant. And we can do that by shuffling these 250 concepts, doing a permutation test. So we do this 1,000, 10,000 times, and I did it 10,000 times because the results were sometimes slightly different. I shuffle them 10,000 times with 250 words, and every time I try to pick out 70 items instead of the Swadesh items randomly, and the rest of the items. And then I see whether I get a similar difference here. And the difference would be something like 81 to 73 would be 7 to 8 percentage points in difference in stability. And I did the same for the Leipzig-Jakarta list and for some other lists that I tested. And here you can see what I tested so far. Swadesh 1955 is 0.03, so only in 3% of the cases from 10,000 trials, I find a difference that is higher or the same as the difference of 0.08. In terms of Swadesh 1952, so the 200 item list where I have more concepts, of course, and the split is a little bit different, I get also the same margins. So I get even like a little bit fewer cases. In terms of Leipzig-Jakarta, the list that many people now claim to fame and say this is the most stable or borrowing resistant list, we find that it is not significant if you go for significant standards by saying 0.05 should be significant. It needs to be tested more. So maybe it's just an, so I would not bet now any of my body parts to say that this list is something that is really going to be always, because it's only one data set, yeah? But I think it's something that we need to inquire further. Here's an example. What we can also do, we can do these admixture plots that show the content of the lexical items in a given word list, yeah? So you have a word list for one language, like Zaumin here. And then I can just show these are red. So red is Hmong Mien. So these are all genuine Hmong Mien words. There are few unique items in the Swadesh part. And there are also almost no global items that are shared among all the languages in the sample here on Sino-Tibetan, Tai Kadai, and Hmong Mien in the Swadesh part. But in the non-basic part, we find that there are quite a few global items. And we find that there are also fewer items that are singletons or shared by the language itself and no longer etymology relatable, etc. So I think this is also illustrating that there is a difference. There is an effect by borrowability and stability that we can detect for this data set. And this again calls for doing these analysis in the future and trying to find out whether we find more of these effects on other language families. And here just also, I do not need to keep you too long time because this is already also, I'm close to the end already of what I wanted to present here. Here are some examples how we can do this in order to improve also our assessments. We can make geographic plots with the data. And here I have the term for dui in Chinese. So correct, right, correct. And you can see that dui occurs in all the Zhuang languages here in the yellow sample. So they are not Chinese. And you see that it almost doesn't occur in any of the Chinese dialects. It only occurs in this case of dui in Guangzhou And you might now wonder why this is the case. And they here, you have it here. The case is, I can tell you, is that my sample selection has words like 刚好 in Beijing Chinese here. And you can see, like, if we have words like this or 正好, and we have these concepts which actually mean in Chinese that something is very correct or certain things like that. That means that the concepticon mapping that I carried out is not perfect. So they did not ask for the same concept. And since there are many words that you can use in order to express the meaning of correct right, my sampling here has a bias because parts of the data express a different concept. These are important items that I can only see when looking at the map and seeing the differences here in order to improve the algorithm in the future also, improve the data sampling procedure. Here's another example for hua in Chinese, the flower, which has been borrowed not to many of the Hmong-Mien languages, but to our Zhuang languages. And you can see an area cluster here because this is Nunu, a Mienic variety, if I'm not mistaken, and it has also taken the same form as my Zhuang dialects here. And since the data comes from really different sources, this is a rather nice result that shows that we have certain area clusters here where the similar words have spread. And the last example is the Mingzi, that is the name in Chinese. That has actually two forms, Ming, the name, and Mingzi, the name sign, if you translate it literally. And I would say that Mingzi is the more recent one that comes from Mandarin Chinese that is then spreading across all China, but also the languages that are not Chinese. And you can see a big cluster here again in this area. And I think this is something like maybe even give us hints on certain convergent zones where we have certain similar concepts that have recently been introduced there and can be found among the languages. So concluding remarks, the method is not necessarily spectacular, but can help us to work on the efficient annotation of xenologues in a larger number of languages of the world. It is also time that we bring our attention back to borrowings because we have been trying to exclude them a lot in the past, and the exclusion has not been done in a very, could have been done in a more consistent way by, if we exclude data, we could at least annotate where they come from, but the sources of borrowings or the similar, or whether similar sources are in the data has not been done in all the data sets. We all have not been doing that in the past. So, but I think in the future, it would be better if we always annotate the borrowings as well, so we can actually look at these and derive statistics from them in the future. The workflow is fully replicable. That's something I'm very proud of. Data annotation is transparent. And this is thanks to Robert Forkel, who has been joining, with whom I have been doing this together. So I'm presenting here on my own, but this is actually common work. And he has been helping me a lot also in checking my code recently, which reminded me of the fact that if you're programming, you should always have a second person checking your code in order to avoid certain programming errors. And the results regarding the significance of the Leipzig-Jakarta list merit further evaluation, I think, I would say, because here's one result that I just checked also before. I was running some code during the other talks. So, and I wanted to show you this one because it might be interesting in this context. In the Concepticon, we have assembled almost all the concept lists we could find. Yeah, so we have also assembled many lists that Georgi has published in the past, and many other of the Moscow group also. So we have this list, Starostin 2010-50, the ultra stable list. So we call it like the, so that is our way to call it here. And if I make this a little bit bigger, you can see my significance test that I just ran with the data. You can see that this yields very high scores. So we have 11% of differences in the word here in terms of stability. So it's much more stable than the other concepts. And we have 0.03 significance by using a try run of 1,000 items. Yeah, so it's quite significant difference here. And if you compare that with the Yachonov list, where you also have a difference of 8 items, you see that this is not passing our significance test. But we need, of course, not only Southeast Asia, we need to test this on many other languages in the world. That is something that is really important. But this was just to illustrate that we can actually use this for these purposes as well. And yeah, final remark, just Robert Forkel, so it's a common work with him, and the code is available online. And we are trying to really make this really extremely, so that you can really run it on your own computer and use it also for other data sets in the future. So it should not be that it is only knowledge that is known to us and we will try to hide it and not share the idea. So it's more like this is open to criticism and also open to open to improvements. We will submit the paper to a post-publication review journal next week, hoping for helpful to comments, and it may be that we invite also some people who are today present to comment on the paper, because this is a new journal that we wanted to test for post-publication review, which is maybe also a nice way to collaborate or to elaborate on methods like the one that is proposed here. And that is all. Spasiba za vнимание.
Thank you very much. Any questions? No.
Mattis, I have a question. So thanks for the great talk, but I'm still not 100% sure how the automated borrowing detection procedure actually works. So the sets that you feed to the algorithm, the Sinitic sets, the Tai-Kadai sets, the Hmong-Mien sets, are they initially marked as non-genetically related?
Yes. So it's very simple. So the approach is, it's no magic there, yeah?
Okay, right. So the machine already, the machine looks for similarities between languages that are already assumed to be non-related.
Yeah, so it doesn't work on language internal cognates, for example. It doesn't work on Balto-Slavic. Yeah.
But since it just it compares the phonetic shapes, what makes it so specially applicable to borrowings rather than cognates?
I think what I started to do here is, and what is a little bit new, is using two different kinds of, to really trying to make these phonetic versus genetic differences in words. Yeah, Roger Les has been using these terms, whether one likes them or not, but like genetic meaning more like sound correspondence based, and phonetic meaning more like surface, right? Phonetics, phonologically similar, etc. You can mimic this a little bit with the algorithms. So the first algorithm that searches for cognates language family internally is based on sound correspondences and tries to really get the best out of that. This would be also the expert who would not just make cognate judgments based on surface similarity, but really look into sound correspondences to mimic that behavior. Now, in order to mimic the behavior of an expert, we're actually looking for borrowings across language families in order to find the Wanderwörter as one interesting research topic. They would look at phonetic aspects as well. They would not look at the deep relationships unless you make a real, like these kinds of stratification analysis that we know from, for example, from Laurent Saga, who has been doing that a lot in Old Chinese and Hmong-Mien contexts, etc. But if we just say we look at recent borrowings in order to get some statistics or the ones that are really transparent, and we just use a simple algorithm that is just a little bit more elaborated phonetically than Levenstein distance.
Okay, so how would this algorithm work on something like English and French, for instance, where actually, you know, if you put in English and French borrowings in their orthographic representation, the results would probably be better than if you put them in phonetically transcribed.
That is something we need to test, because you know, the algorithms that find the phonetics, the dissimilarities, something important that you're pointing here to, actually, because so far I've only tested on the Southeast Asian languages, right? And I've already seen cases where the algorithm is not doing well because of the similarity that I use. And sometimes because you need to look at the syllable in Southeast Asian languages, and the algorithm splits them into parts, right? So in this case already, there I already lose important signal. English and French, it's something we need to test it the next on the versions. I know John Lerbon has been testing these algorithms that I used there on some other data set in the past, only pairwise judgments that I mentioned before, and in the area of, sorry, I don't know which, I think it involved Turkic languages in somewhere in Asia, but not in Southeast Asia, but more like in, I think it involved like languages. I can actually look up the paper, sorry, I will just look up. There's a paper by Menessier et al., Central Asian Language Survey. I don't know whether you, so these languages, they have Turkic languages involved, and yeah, And they tested it on some of the data that we have there, and what they found out is that this algorithm works better than edit distance, for example. We need to improve, but it's an important point. What you say that the similarity measure needs to be inspected, how it works, and if it turns out that it fails, for example, on English and French, we need to enhance it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
and yeah, a second question was just triggered by the fact that you pointed out the word to bite in Jongnai, and so I checked my own word lists, and there's actually a doublet in Jongnai. There's an old word for to bite, which is of Hmong-Mien origin, and there's Chinese borrowing, and I think there's that if you make really detailed lists of cognates, then in many situations you'll find doublets where in this region, in the East Asian region especially, where there's one word that is inherited and one word that is recently borrowed from Chinese or some other prestigious language. So I suppose that the algorithm probably doesn't really care, or maybe it does, I don't know, if the concept is represented by more than one synonym. Does it do anything special?
No, it doesn't. I think it shouldn't do anything special so far. I would put that into the evaluation afterwards. Because the algorithm is only supposed to give me a first assessment, right? And then I use the algorithm in order to maybe manually annotate data for borrowings that are interesting. Because I would also say, like, we have forgotten that borrowings in this sense, in a contact area, are actually interesting for us to annotate, because we could do a lot of analysis, secondary analysis on them, right? Also on phonetic similarity in order to train new algorithms on that also. I mean, these are cases. The doublets are an important point. I had forgotten about that because, of course, you find the doublets also in Chinese dialects and can use them as a proxy to identify some borrowing sometimes, right? I mean, Cantonese has 2 words for sun now in some data sets, in the more recent data sets, because they borrow the Mandarin form, right? So the doublets are actually a very good point for evaluation, because one could say that the algorithm one could afterwards test to which degree these doublets can be found there, and then also use them as a proxy to see how well the algorithm then performs. So, and yeah, I think that is a very good point. It would also maybe tell us that the borrowings, we could actually afterwards check whether doublets are, how long are they actually stable in a language, right? So how long do we keep a doublet? So when do we really replace it with something? So when does one of the words win? Something that we could actually also check. This would be a hint on the long run, yeah, to be more recent borrowings. It would actually give us also some interesting hints, right? So that we could use. Very, very interesting. I wrote that down, so I will have a look at that. Thanks.